Are you real?
What's the big deal about Jesus?
Why do I feel so empty?
Isn't the Bible just an old fairy tale?
What is the meaning of life?
What happens after this life?
After all I've done, do you still love me?
God, can you hear me?
If you could ask God one question, what would it be?
Good evening and welcome to the One Question live event. My name is Clint Davison. I'm one of the ministers here at the Linder Road Church of Christ in Meridian, Idaho. We have over the last several weeks posed the question to our community, if you could ask God one question, what would it be? We've asked through social media. We've asked with billboards in our community. We have sent out postcards in the mail. We have bumper stickers. We've just interacted with our friends and neighbors. And we have received several responses, and we're excited to share those responses with you this evening. We have many people here in the building with us tonight in our live audience. We very much appreciate you all being here with us tonight. But we also assume that we have many people watching online, and we're very excited that you're taking the time out of your evening to have your questions answered. This is our second of 4 nights, our second session tonight. And what our objective is over these sessions is to answer your questions. We're taking the top 12 categories of questions, and we're going to do our very best to have those questions answered through the Word of God. By these presentations given by 4 very qualified speakers. Now, you might hear a statement like that and be a little bit skeptical. You might wonder if God's Word, if the Bible really has the answers that you need. And that's totally okay. We believe that God's not afraid of our questions, and we believe that God's Word does have our answers. So tonight, if you hear something that you've never heard before, maybe something you disagree with, maybe something you don't quite understand, that's totally okay too. We want to continue the dialogue with you. We want to continue the dialogue with you so much, in fact, that we're going to offer that to you as we do these live presentations. For those of you here in the audience, these are available to you too. For those of you who are watching online, these options are available to you. We want to give you these 4 different ways. Number one, if you're a Twitter user, you can follow us on Twitter at 1Question Idaho. That's the number 1 Question Idaho, or you can search using hashtag 1Question. You can also continue to pose your questions on the website, onequestion.net. If you're watching right now on Facebook Live, you can ask your question in the comments section, and we'll field your questions that way. Or if you'd like to text us a question, please feel free to text us at 208-614-1639. Again, that's 208-614-1639. And we will give you a voice tonight. We're going to have, at the end of our speaker's presentation, we're going to have a few minutes where we're going to take the questions that we received tonight, and he's going to answer those questions. So if during the presentation tonight you hear something that sparks your interest or something that raises another question, please feel free to contact us through any of these ways and give us the opportunity to answer that question. And again, thank you so much for spending your time with us this evening. Thank you so much on behalf of the Linder Road Church of Christ and OneQuestion.net for taking the time to be here with us. I want to invite you now to watch this video clip as we begin to answer your questions.
Why do bad things happen to good people?
Why do good things happen to bad people?
Why did I lose my only brother?
Why did I lose my sister?
My brother at such a young age.
Is heaven real?
If God is a loving God,
If God is a loving God, why is there a hell?
why is there a hell?
Why is there a hell?
If God is a loving God,
If God is a loving God, if God is a loving God, why do we suffer? Why do I suffer?
why do I suffer?
Why do I continue to struggle with jealousy?
Why do I continue to struggle with transparency?
Welcome to One Question Live event. We're so glad that you are here this evening with us. Obviously, we're having a little bit of technical difficulty, but we'll just continue on here. But we're glad that you're here, whether you are sitting in the audience right now or whether you're at home, watching with your iPhone or your iPad or even your computer, we're just really glad that you are here. My name is Richard Sutton, and I'm one of the ministers for the Linder Road Church of Christ here in Meridian, Idaho. We are sponsoring this live event, and we're just glad that you are really here with us. On stage with me this evening here is Dr. Ralph Gilmore. Ralph, good having you with us this evening.
Thank you very much.
How you liking Idaho so far?
I like it.
Yeah, Idaho's a pretty nice place to live. We're just really glad that you are here. Dr. Gilmore is a professor of Bible as well as philosophy at Freed-Hardeman College in Henderson, Tennessee. So, Dr. Gilmore, how long have you been working with the university there?
37 years.
37 years. That's a long time to be working. You're working mostly with young people, of course.
Yes, I love it.
What is it that you like or love the most about working with young people?
Well, I love the fact that they want to do something, that they want to do good. I like their benevolent attitude. I like their willingness to be inquisitors. I like that very much. And by the way, I need to throw this in there. Even though our typical undergraduate population would be 18 to 22, we do have graduate programs, and we involve some guys that are not necessarily conventional college students. I love working with them as well.
Mm-hmm. That's the great thing about going to a college or in life itself, whether you are a young person that's in kind of a transitional period in their life, you have questions about life. Well, life is just a series of transitions. Whether you're young or old, you're constantly transitioning, you're constantly having questions about life. What we have found here at Linder Road, as we have been asking this, doing this 1Question net and live event kind of thing, is we began asking about a month and a half ago our community this question. And the question was, if you could ask God any one question, what would that be? And man, we started having lots of questions come in at us. And we figured that we'd get a lot of questions, but what we had to do is we had to take the questions at the top of the list, and then categorize them. And we categorized them into 12 areas. Mm-hmm. And at the very top of the list, the number one question that was asked by our community was this: why does God allow suffering? And it came at us in a lot of different kinds of ways. One said, why did my mom die? Another said, why did my child die? Why did my child get cancer? One question was, why does God allow pain on earth in terms of disease and war? People really are interested in this thing called suffering. So when you think about that, why do you suppose that is? I mean, why would you think that's at the top of the list for suffering?
Closest to the heart. Those things that contact our value system also cause us problems with trying to figure out exactly what happened. Those things that are just close to our heart, those are the ones. It's like if you have children and grandchildren, you don't have any problems understanding what I'm talking about. And even if you don't have any problems understanding it, because it's just one of those things that affects every household.
So, well, listen, I'm really looking forward to hearing what you had to say. I know you kind of talked about it a little bit in the last session, and you're going to go a little bit deeper into the session this session on suffering. And so, do we have a video on that? Well, we're going to watch a short video, and after that, then you'll be up here, and we'll be ready to hear what you have to say to us.
A question for you. Why must the innocent suffer? Like kids. Why do kids get cancer? Why are there so many kids who are the victims of abuse? Why are there so many, for lack of a better word, terrible parents? Ones who abuse their kids, starve them, or neglect them, while thousands of loving couples would do anything just for one pregnancy to go smoothly, or even to have one pregnancy test come back positive. Why must the innocent suffer?
Thank you very much, Richard. I'm not surprised that this is at the top of the list. Suffering, not only because it affects all of us, but because I've done several of these 1Question campaigns, is always in the top 3 questions. It doesn't matter where you are. I've done this in Dallas and in Frankfort, Kentucky, and in Fresno, California, and several other places. It's always at the top of the list. So we're not talking about something that's unusual here, although the beautiful state of Idaho is very unique in a lot of different ways. The very fact that you're interested in suffering is not unique because it's close to the heart of so many of us. Now, I hope I didn't promise too much, but we're going to be talking about why do innocent children suffer and why do bad things happen to good people in this particular hour, and hopefully kind of closing the loop on some of the things we've been talking about. Although, do remember that whenever I try to give you some head answers on some of this stuff, it doesn't mean I always understand it with my heart. I'm a guy, and my wife, for instance, if I'm going somewhere like some beautiful place like this, I'll go home and I'll say, "Hey, babe, how you doing?" And she say, "How'd it go?" And I'll say, "Fine." Okay, now that's a perfectly good answer for a guy. Okay, it's just fine. All right, I don't need details. I don't need to give details. I just say fine. But she said, "No, you need to tell me some." Okay, she wants details. All right, and that's the way she's been since I married her, and I did it anyway. Okay, and so she wants details because she wants to know about relationships. She wants to know who did I meet and what were the people in Idaho like and all of that sort of thing. Plus, we have some good friends from Idaho that we met in Twin Falls, Idaho. So it's not new to us, but nonetheless, it's a matter of dialogue and conversation. So we zoomed in and we looked at God. And what did we learn about God? Well, we learned that God can do anything that's consistent with His power, and He can do anything that power can accomplish. According to Hebrews 6, 17 and 18, He can do that. We also said about God that He can know anything that can be known. But I want you to remember also that we said that there's something about being in an environment that challenges you that makes you grow one way or the other. It makes you grow stronger, it makes you grow weaker, but one way or the other, you're not the same. It kind of removes the opportunity of neutrality because now you're in a place, I've noticed already that a lot of people exercise in Idaho. I've seen a lot of people running, none of them smiling. Okay, but I see a lot of them running, and of course being outdoors is very important to you guys. Also, I've heard a few you bets. I miss that down south where I'm from because we don't get you bet a lot, and up here I get a lot of you bets, and I'm liking that. And when somebody says, "Hey, how you doing? Thanks for letting me come," you bet. Okay, so I like that. That's a good thing. It brings back good memories. All right, but zooming in, it's about us, you know, and why does God allow this, et cetera, et cetera. Well, I'm going to try to look at the entire picture now and zoom out some as we think about why God wants us to be here. Our president, who is David Shannon, I think that he might have been here last year, he told me how wonderful this congregation was, and I have found what he says to be true. So I'm thankful that we have a chance to come. I just regret that we don't have longer to be here because this is the week before finals, and their finals are next week, so for some odd reason they're going to be looking for some final exams. All right, when you zoom out, what do you see? God's glory is eternal. When you zoom in, what do you see? You see a lot of suffering. Now here's the way. Okay, here's a random factoid. There was a time at Freed Hardman where our missionary in residence, C.W. Bradley, his office was right across from mine. You may not know him, but he's one of the two people who did Elvis's funeral. Okay, and one of the things that you might not know about Elvis is that he had a Bible study set up with some people in the Churches of Christ, and his stepmother actually became a member of the Obey the Gospel, but Elvis would set up an occasion and never would do it. So I trusted Brother Bradley for his wisdom, and I was asked to speak at a youth rally. That's back when I was a lot younger, and it was before AARP. I'm AARP now. I didn't like it when they first started sending me stuff, but now I'm just kind of saying, "Hey, give me the discount, wipe the slobber off my chin." Okay, so I'm kind of thinking I'm okay with being AARP. All right, so I said to him when I was younger, I said, "Brother Bradley, I've received this thing about, you know, young people growing spiritually, and that's not one of the typical things that you speak about. You know, when you go, Rob, speak at a youth rally, it's sex, drugs, and rock and roll, that kind of stuff that you're supposed to preach about." And so I couldn't figure out, well, exactly, you know, what am I going to do about this spirituality thing? He said, "Have you considered 2 Corinthians chapter 4? And because of him, I fell in love with this passage. Because these momentary afflictions that we have, regardless if you have something chronic, and I mean you have to deal with it every day. Whatever it is that you have to deal with it, these are but light momentary afflictions. Remember, this is the guy who mentions all the things that happened to him in 2 Corinthians chapter 12. Paul been through a lot of persecution. These light momentary afflictions which are for a moment, work for you a far more exceeding and eternal weight of glory in the heavens. And then he goes on to say that we are here not because of the things that we see, but because of the things that we don't see. So when you zoom out, what do you see? You see God's glory. You see, well done, good and faithful servant. You've been faithful over a few things. I'll make you rule over many things. You see, come into the joys of my Lord. You see the opportunity to be with Jesus. And so when you zoom out, heaven will surely be worth it all. But we have some other things to talk about first. So let's talk about people. Yeah, here we are. And let's talk about the fact, is there a way that God could have made people so that there would not have been suffering? Well, God's got to grow you. Some of you have already planted your garden for this year. God's got to grow you in the same way that you have to nourish and till the soil and fertilize whatever it is that you want to have in your garden. It's going to take work, unless you go buy it in plastic at the grocery store. But it's going to take work because there's no way to easily do this. So God's got to grow us. Now, how does He grow us? Well, one way that He grows us is that He puts us in an environment that is very challenging. Therefore, God is perfect and you and I are free. We've talked about this idea of being being centers of freedom, but let's see what that actually means. To be a human being is to be a responsible free agent, i.e., humans can make different moral decisions than those in fact that they do make. That means that's the basis of responsibility. Okay, if I am facing this decision or this decision, am I responsible? Well, if I'm not responsible, I must be made to make one choice or the other. But if I am responsible, then I could choose this, or I could respond differently and choose this. Responsibility. So if there's no freedom of choice, there's no responsibility. I don't know if you have dogs or cats. We have a dog at home. My wife has been a cat lover all these years, and now she's got a dog. Okay, and so he's okay, and you know what you say, I'm not letting that dog on my bed, and there he is sleeping right between us. Okay, and so he's a Maltese and zoo. Okay, so he's a pretty cool little dog, and I like him a lot. But the point is that he's not responsible for moral choices. Now, he will know whether or not he disappoints you or whether or not you have done something that he likes. He can tell that by the tone of your voice. But he will not commit suicide because he has failed you. He will not do that. Why? Because he does not have that ability to think through moral issues like that, but you and I do. Matter of fact, there's a part of our brain that actually is activated according to PET imaging in the medical profession. Whenever a person thinks descriptively, it's like saying, well, the cushion is blue and the wood is brown. That's description. When I start thinking prescriptively, it means that I'm saying, oh, wow, don't kill me with that chair. Or don't grind it up into dust and make me eat it. Don't do something that will hurt me with this chair. That's called prescription. And there's a part of your brain that's activated when you think prescriptive thoughts as opposed to descriptive thoughts. And there it is, the same deal. You can choose. As William Glasser would say in his reality therapy, you choose one way or the other. You need to make the choice, and then you need to understand that the consequences of the choice are also yours because they come along with the choice itself. And as long as we make our children exempt from these choices, we don't help them to grow up. But whenever they not only make the choice, but then they actually have to clean up the spilled milk, or they have to do something to fix whatever it was that they broke, then you are helping them to learn that consequences come with decisions, and you're helping them to grow up in a better way. Therefore, to be a human being means that I have this, unless there are controlling constraints. Now that is, it's kind of the plane, and I'm trying to get all regulated here. Okay, so I'm talking about my sinuses. I've never been regulated otherwise. All right, so when we talk about the absence of controlling constraints, let me just say this. What does that mean? Well, somebody could be holding a gun to your head, and then if you make a decision, or they'll also say, I'm going to kill you, or I'm going to kill your mother and your father, or your children, or your wife, whatever, well, that's a controlling constraint. But in the event that there's not a controlling constraint, that's your choice. You chose that. As my mother would say, you made your bed, lie in it. Did your mother say that? Okay, all right, you did this. You made that choice for yourself, and so you have this wonderful two-edged sword. It's a great thing as long as if things are going well. Then when you start making a series of bad choices, and then the consequences are building up on you, then it's another matter. God was confronted with only two choices relative to the time that He made you. When He made you, He could have made you with the freedom of choice or without. So let's choose both options. Let's choose one option at a time. All right, God makes you not free. Then if you are not free, then you have no more moral responsibility than a computer program. I got one daughter. Three of our four daughters are teachers. My wife's a retired teacher, and I teach. Okay, well, we don't like money. Okay, and so there's a lot of teachers in my family. But one of the things about being free is that if you're not free, well, she's working on this thing where she programs this computer, it's a master's degree in math, and then the computer spits out the programming code, and then it looks like a little dragon or something. Okay, now what does it do? Exactly what it's been programmed to do. Does it have freedom of will? No, that computer doesn't really hate you. You may think that it hates you. It doesn't really hate you. It does what it is programmed to do. Now, if you're not made with freedom of will, that's what you are giving back to God. You are a marionette. You are a puppet, and the puppeteer is God, and He's making you make every move that you make. But if that's true, then why could He possibly send me to hell? Because He's the one who made me do these things. Well, that's because that's not accurate. God gave you this freedom of choice. On the other hand, God gave you this freedom of choice, and now what? I'm sorry for the camera people. Okay, and now what? Well, the problem then is you don't have freedom of choice, and that means then that the basis of all human emotions is now less than it was. Because what is love if you don't have a choice to love or not to love? What is loyalty if you don't have a choice to be loyal or not to be loyal? It doesn't mean what it used to mean. Therefore, it does come with the possibility of evil, and God knew that it did. And the reason why I knew that it did is because He's going to give you this gift. You're going to be in His image. So He began immediately to make plans to put the scheme of redemption or God's plan for buying us back, saving us, into effect. If you look at 1 Peter 1 and verse 20, all this was put into effect before the foundation of the world. I mean, before the foundation of the world, God knew that this was going to happen. When He made you with freedom of choice, He knew that there was the possibility of doing it. And He began making a plan then for the sending of His Son so that ultimately we would have a way to get out of this sinful situation. But it's not new to God. According to Ephesians 3 and verse 10, it is the manifold wisdom of God. The church was in the manifold wisdom of God before He ever created us. Well, maybe some would say, well, okay, so you have freedom of choice. But what I want is a guarantee. Sorry, impossible. Those are logically impossible. The word guarantee does not come with freedom of choice. It does not come. That's why you say vows that indicate that there's something that you are involved in making a choice here. We have this woman to be your lawful wedded wife, to live together to God's ordinance concerning marriage, and promise to love her, comfort her, honor, and keep her in sickness and health, and forsake us. All others, give yourself only to her so long as you both shall live. Now that is your will. You said that. You promised that. And you probably did it before other witnesses. And therefore, were you serious about this? And if you're not serious about it, does it have anything to say about your integrity or lack thereof? Because somehow or another, today's kids seem to think that being married a long time is just an easy deal. My wife and I have been married 46 years. 44 of them were happy. Those first 2 are really rough. Okay, and so we've been married for a long time. I think the last time we probably agreed is when we both said, I do. Okay, that was about it. We've disagreed a lot since then and love each other more now than we ever have. But when I'm thinking about this, is there any such thing as a guarantee that a free being will always make free choices? Nope. That's like the blue people of Avatar. That is imagination. There is no such thing as a guarantee if indeed you are free. So, what do we want to say now about evil? Why is there evil in the world? Why is there suffering in the world? Sometimes we confuse what we think is evil with something that's really not evil, and vice versa. Like when we had the car wreck last Wednesday, and so my wife was, had a seatbelt across here, and she's pretty bruised. That's one reason I wouldn't even think about her coming to, was because of the bruising of the car accident. But one of the things that we can think of is, well, is it evil that we had a car accident? Or what if it had been worse? Then what would the situation be? Listen, I said to her while she was in the front seat as we were waiting for the fire department to come and the police and half the town. Okay, and so I said to her, look, people are people and things are things. Besides that, it was a rental. But people are people and things are things. So if you can get that right, you've got a lot going for you right there. When people mess up, it's when they confuse that things are people and people are things. So if we can get that straight, then we understand that a car wreck in and of itself is not necessarily an evil thing unless it turns me away from God. In which case, it still wouldn't inherently be evil, but it would be one of those tools that would help me to get away from God, because I would blame God for it the rest of my life. I'm thinking of a couple now who continue to blame God after 30 years because their teenage son died in a car wreck. Well, he was in a car with other boys. Boys have way too much testosterone. He was sitting on the back of a convertible with the top down. He was sitting on the top, no seatbelt, no nothing, go off the road, hit a tree, and he's dead. Do I want him to be dead? Absolutely not. But what they've not come to terms with is that their son made poor choices. And if you make poor choices, then what do you expect God to do, to step in all the time and make sure that our poor choices are going to turn out good for us? So here's something that a lot of people maybe have not heard. The only thing that's really, that's only sinful. Okay, now this thing right here, it could or could not be used for a good purpose. It could be used for a good purpose if it advances slides. It could be used for a bad purpose if I try to drive it into your neck. Okay, so this thing right here could be an instrument of good. It could be an instrument of bad, but in and of itself, it's neither good or bad. It's neutral, morally speaking. It does not have any moral value. But what you do with it might have moral value. Therefore, if something bad happens to you and you go running away from God, wow, that could be instrumentally bad. Something bad happens to you and you go running toward God, Romans 5 and verse 5, because your perseverance, your sufferings lead to perseverance, and perseverance leads to hope, etc. Okay, it's possible that it can make you turn toward God. So when I'm thinking about intrinsic evil, I mean something that is so evil that it's going to interfere with your relationship with God every time. You see, a car wreck may or may not do it. A tsunami may or may not do it. An earthquake may or may not do it. A hurricane may or may not do it. Even sickness in the hospital may or may not do it. I've learned as a preacher, do not predict how people are going to be in the hospital once they know that they're dying. Because sometimes it's not a good visit, and sometimes they wind up encouraging you. Because they've come to terms with their own death, and they're thinking, please don't be sorry for me, I'm ready. And then there you are feeling like a slug because you dreaded that opportunity to go visit them, and you visited them and received more from the visit than they did. So what's going to happen? What are you going to do with it? Maybe 90% of life is how you respond to the other 10%. Maybe that's what it is. There are a lot of bad things that can happen to you, so how do you respond to it? So, the only intrinsic evil is sin. It is not any natural catastrophe. It is not whatever side of the issue you happen to be on global warming. It is not gun control in and of itself, although I certainly do not want any innocent people killed anymore by people who have mental issues and they have been allowed to have guns, etc. This is not a political point. I'm sick of the dying and I know that you are as well. But the point is not those things as much as it is sin. Sin is the point. Because sin will change your relationship with God 100 times out of 100. Isaiah 59, verses 1 and 2. Behold, my hand is not shortened that it cannot save, nor my ear heavy that it cannot hear. But your sins have separated between you and your God, and have hidden his face from you that he will not hear. That's it. It's not because, well, my house was destroyed in a fire. It's not because something bad happened to one of my children, and certainly it's terrible. I have 3 daughters that actually have run half marathons. I was kind of fussing about the runners earlier, but that was being hypocritical because I have 3 daughters who have run half marathons, and they sometimes run the St. Jude Children's Hospital Marathon from where we're from. That's a great children's hospital. One of the hardest things to run the 13.1 miles in Memphis is when you pass by the place where the children come out and greet you as you are running, and many of them have no hair. Many of them are in wheelchairs with IV needles, and that is both a blessed experience as well as a tough one, because obviously our hearts go out to the people with all kinds of illness, especially those that are childhood illnesses. But even then, cancer cannot do some stuff. Like I said, I'm sure if cancer has touched your family, hands up please. Okay, now what did cancer make you do in your relationship with God? The answer is nothing. What did cancer force you to do? The answer is nothing. What did cancer make you feel about God? The answer is nothing. Cancer is a biological condition, and it does not have the power in and of itself to make you feel either better about God or worse about God. It is a biological condition. It cannot do that. On the other hand, how you handle it is the point. So, concerning evil, nothing subhuman can be intrinsically evil, since it doesn't involve anything that messes up your relationship with God or your relationship with each other. Jesus would say it this way in Matthew 22, love the Lord your God with your heart, soul, mind, and strength. Love your neighbor as yourself. I teach my kids that's the vertical and the horizontal. The vertical is love the Lord your God, heart, soul, mind, and strength. Now, can cancer kill that? No. Love your neighbor as you love yourself. Can cancer kill that? No. Are you still sad about these things that have happened? I was preaching in Kentucky not too long ago, and a guy came forward whose brother had died. I won't give you details because I don't want it in any way to capitalize on what he did in a long. And I had told the story about my sister dying and how I had gone to church with just a truckload of guilt and just guilt and guilt and guilt. I don't think my mother and dad did this to me, but I somehow translated Christianity as guilt and guilt and guilt and guilt. You need to feel guilty about not going to church. You need to feel guilty if you're not a good person. You need to feel guilty if you're not perfect. And guilt and guilt and guilt. Well, there came a time in my adult life I got tired of that. And it was after a heart attack when my cardiologist said to me, I don't know why you had a heart attack, he said. And I was thinking, I can get that same opinion from somebody else a lot cheaper. Okay, but nonetheless, he said that's what he said. Okay, so here's the deal. There's some stuff about that I couldn't control. There's some stuff about that I could control. And one of them is being so hard on myself and my view of Christianity that it was sucking the life of Christianity out of me. I did not enjoy my preaching. I did not enjoy other things because I was getting a distorted view of the gospel. Well, suffering can do that, but also suffering can make you stronger. I mentioned to you before that an atheist or a skeptic or an agnostic really should not be using the problem of evil on you. Why? Because they have no standard by which to make a judgment of evil. They cannot say this is evil or this is not evil. One time we had a half day off in Tanzania, I had some students there. We were working. And on a half-day off safari, we watched one Cape buffalo fighting another Cape buffalo, and then the bigger one, the larger one, just took his horns and just hooked them right under the rib cage of the other Cape buffalo and just slung him over his head. And a lot of people were going, ooh, ooh, you know. You know what that is? That's just nature. It's not right or wrong that should happen. That's just nature. But it's different for you because you are made in the image of God. Therefore, as we think about the world, what kind of world do you live in? A lot of you, when you zoom out, you can see periods of time in your life where you have grown the most. And I had a 57 Chevrolet that I went to Freed Hardeman with. I was bad, straight pipes out the back. Kind of fixed up some of it myself. Kind of looked like it, but I didn't care. It was a 57 Chevrolet. Okay, and I love that car. Man, I love that car. I also noticed as long as I had that car that I had friends that I didn't even know because they wanted to borrow my car. All right, and so consequently, people almost never bring it back as full of gas unless they rented the car. Okay, people almost never, bring it back the same amount of gas it had when they borrowed it. And so my dad got the gas bill and he said, son, you have friends that are taking your car to Honolulu? He's kind of like, So here's the deal. I stopped letting people use my car, and I lost some friends. But by the way, when I start paying for my own tires and my own gas and my own car insurance, I grew more than I ever could have as long as Dad was paying for it. Now, what do you learn if somebody is constantly covering up your mistakes for you? Somebody is constantly, clearing up all the messes that you make. What do you learn from that? It is said that when a person goes into drugs and alcohol, their maturation rate stops at that moment right there. So that when my daughter was 18, she was emotionally 18. Got out drugs at 25, she was still emotionally 18. Because she didn't grow during that time because she was depending on other people like mom and dad to enable her to do things that we really thought, well, this will be the last time, or this will be the last time, or this will be the last time. You know in your heart that this world is made as a place for spiritual maturation. It is made for that purpose. You have a probationary period, and you do not know how long it is. Maybe that's one reason why Jesus did not even know how long his period was here on earth or when he would return in Matthew 24 and verse 36. Because that might have influenced somehow or another the fact that at the time that he said, nobody knows when I'll return, not even the angels, only the Father in heaven. Well, as far as you and I are concerned, this world can be it can be a devastating place. There's a lot of unhappiness and sickness and other things here. But I want you to understand, why did God make it? Do not judge. I haven't seen the movie yet, but I have a couple of kids who've seen the latest Marvel, Infinity Wars or whatever it is. I've not seen it, but apparently others have because it's had the largest opening weekend of any movie ever. Well, some of that money was not ours because we haven't seen it yet. But then on the other hand, if you want to judge that movie against a chick flick. Now, I got daughters, and so I know, what a chick flick is? That's a weepy movie that you go to, and at some point you're going to be crying. Okay, like The Notebook or The Horse Whisperer. I would rather see some movie where the horse gets blown up. Okay, I'm just kidding. I'm just kidding. But can you judge one genre of movie for another genre of movie unless you understand what the purpose of this genre of movie is? In the same way, can you judge this world? If you think this world is a hedonistic paradise, well, of course you're going to hate it because it is a hedonistic paradise. But on the other hand, if you consider what this world is really made for, and that is a place for you and I to develop spiritually, then what we learn from this is, look at what this world is for. It will meet our physical needs. It does allow you to have a reasonable degree of freedom. It will challenge you, and it will allow people to learn from its environment. Just exactly what you need if someday you are going to try to get ready to live with God. Just exactly what you need, given the purpose for which God made it. I don't see anybody holding up 3 minutes or whatever. Okay, and so this world with its evil is a probationary period for us. God never intended for it to be permanent, but on the other hand, there's another place that is. And that's the place where God will wipe away the tears, Revelation 21. That's the place described as roads with transparent gold. That's the place where Jesus is the Son. That's the place where there are no wheelchairs. I was thinking about that as they were letting the people in wheelchairs board the plane early, and I didn't mind that at all. I'm glad that I was not in a wheelchair. Last week in Parkersburg, West Virginia, sometimes we can have a pity party for ourselves and about how bad it is for us. Then there was a guy who was maybe a little bit loud in Texas Roadhouse. We were in West Virginia, but nonetheless Texas Roadhouse. Okay, and there and Joyce and I were watching him. He had no arms. I mean, no arms. I mean, not even stumps. Just no arms. He didn't look old enough to be a thalidomide baby. I don't know exactly how he lost his arms, but I do know he was happy about life. And he was also happy when the two people that he was with would put individual bites on his plate so he could lower his head into his plate and could eat. Now I'm saying, if that guy can have a better attitude about life than I do sometimes, then I need to be considering my own attitude toward life. Okay, I don't know if it's time or not, but I'm quitting and we can... I can't actually, there's a glare on the clock.
Well, then it's time.
Okay.
Well, thank you again for answering those questions about suffering. We have received several questions. As Richard mentioned, we've received several questions about this topic. We have time for 4 or 5 of these questions, depending on how much detail you want to go into in the answers. One of the questions that we received this evening was, why do some people suffer to the point of suicide?
Okay. Remember when I said absence of controlling constraints? I'm going to assume that you're talking about a suicide in which the person is fully in control of their ability to choose good from bad. Because suicide means self-death in Latin. So it might not always be true of suicide. A former head of the Bible department at Freed-Hardeman, after he had taught his last class, a couple of weeks later, he committed suicide because he had the type of depression that is often fatal. My grandfather on my mother's side committed suicide, and his son, my uncle, committed suicide because that was back in the days when people just thought that if you were depressed, it was a sign of spiritual weakness. And therefore, if you actually went to get your depression, checked, to check for the level of the psychotropic drugs, serotonin and all that stuff in your system, well, somehow or another, in that generation, it was just a bad thing. Let me say, first of all, about depression, and then I'll talk about suicide. About depression, I would want to say to you that if you have depression, getting it treated is no different than a type 1 diabetic getting insulin. It is no different. And let me also say that depression, however, is not a crutch for you to use the rest of your life. So what you're expected to do, and I have, kids at Freed-Hardeman with suicide, and I will be very lenient with them. I'll give them alternate ways of testing and all that kind of stuff. But then on the other hand, I'm not just going to give them a grade, because that would not be fair to the other students who work for grades. So I will say to them, Go to the doctor, go to the doctor, go to the doctor. Go to a counselor, go to a counselor, go to a counselor. Get this taken care of, and then come back here and let's talk about you doing that paper. Come back here and let's talk about you doing the work that you need to do to finish this class. Now, suicide in and of itself, according to Paul in Ephesians chapter 5, no man hates his own flesh, but he cherishes it. With regard, in the same context where he talks about the fact that a husband should love his wife as Christ loved the church. Now, Paul is talking about those people who are in a normal state of mind who would choose to commit suicide, that it would be sinful. But then, since you and I are not good mind readers, what we ought to do in the event of a suicide is to not get into the God game. In other words, you do not make judgments about heaven or hell. That's above your pay grade. You cannot know their mind, and you cannot know at the time that they did it, why that they did it. On the other hand, you have to be careful here, because if you say, well, suicide is not such a big deal, then it can actually sway somebody who's on the bubble to commit suicide thinking, well, I'm not going to have to pay for it in the next world. So I want to try to avoid those two extremes. Number one, I don't want to encourage anybody to commit suicide. But on the other hand, I want our people to stop being so judgmental about this unless you're good at reading brain chemical levels yourself without any empirical testing. And in the event that you can't do that, then maybe you just might want to back up and then just show compassion to the family that's involved and let God handle that situation, and we don't have to. We appear before the judgment seat of Christ. We do not appear before the judgment seat of Ralph. So, suicide does happen. I think an average of about 7 teenagers a day commit suicide. It's a bad thing. I don't know exactly all the reasons why they do it, but one of the things that I suggested at CYC last year, which is Challenge Youth Conference, there were 15,000 kids there. Okay, and when we were speaking there, I said, you know, we need to take seriously this part about love your neighbor as you love yourself. And we need to talk to young people about loving themselves, how to do that in a biblical way, and what can be done to help to adjust self-image problems that might lead to suicide. So the prevention there is a lot better than the cure.
Very good. Another question we received was, why are people born with birth defects or mental illnesses when drugs or alcohol aren't a factor? Like situations like Down syndrome, autistic, or bipolar?
Yeah. I was at another place recently where a Down syndrome girl who actually was not used to hugging people, she just came up and hugged me for some reason. I was thinking, whatever else happens in this meeting, I have definitely been blessed. Okay, I have friends like Dr. Joe DeWeese, teaches pharmacology, a PhD in biochemistry from Vanderbilt University. He kind of thinks that a lot of this genetic buildup stuff began to happen after the fall, and it's one of the results of the fall. I would be careful to take it as an exclusive reason as to why they're mutations, because I think any time that you get together genetics, that there are going to be possible iterations, which is, you know, things that are repeated, etc. And therefore I wouldn't say that it was necessarily all the result of the fall, but I think that some of it could be. Sure. Another thing that I'd like to say about this is that let's say that we could right now fix all of the heart attacks so that nobody ever died of a heart attack. Well, what about cancer? Well, what if I fix all the cancers and the heart attacks so that nobody dies of that? Well, then what about something else that's lethal? In other words, are you ever going to make it to where this is a permanent place for us with human genetics? And the answer is no. There will always be mutations there. Now, also because of Dr. Joe DeWeese, I now know that through the ENCODE project, which is the Encyclopedia of DNA Information, it was a government thing that started about 2004. They have discovered that in genetics, they're no longer using the expression junk DNA. Because it used to be thought that maybe about 5% of your DNA determined everything, and then the other 95% or so was junk. It wasn't necessary. Well, now that number has dropped to about 20%. And the more we know about DNA, I'm going to predict the lower that number is going to be. I would just stop using junk DNA because God knew what He was doing with the DNA. And I think that even if you could fix every problem that resulted in death, you're not going to chase them all down. And even in the days of Methuselah, 969 years old, he still died. Even at the age of Adam, 900, he still died. This is a lethal environment in which we live, and the only way out of here is to die. Therefore, would I encourage medical technology to keep on trying to learn more and more? Yes, of course, obviously. But there's nothing that we will ever be able to do to make this a perpetual place of living because we lost access to the tree of life. And when you lose access to the tree of life, people are going to die. Some younger than others. Brother Flavel Nichols just died. He was a son of Gus Nichols. He's big stuff over in our part of the world. We loved the Nichols family. He was 99 years old. But then there's a lot of people that will die a lot younger. And part of the deal about a probationary period is that you don't know how long your period is.
One of the earliest questions we received when we first put up the 1question.net website, it's a fairly long question, but I think it's one that is certainly worth answering. It's a woman who writes this, and you'll see that in just a minute. She says, "I'm in a downhill slide. My only child was killed by an impaired driver. Soon after that, my church moved without any warning to the congregation. I've been unable to find a new church home. I'm sight challenged, so I don't drive. My husband of 25 years passed away peacefully after a battle with COPD, leaving me insoluble. I'm now on disability and can't afford to live alone, and I'm looking at homelessness. This all happened in the space of 3 years. I now fear for my life, and I'm 64 years old. Please tell me, God, why do I suffer in this way?"
Well, the first thing that we have to admit here is that we are people of compassion. We feel for her because some of us have experienced some of that ourselves. But if we get to the point that we think, that no one has ever, been through what we have been through, one of the things that we need to do is just to read some of the people in the book of Acts. Sure. How that, for instance, Nero, he was a bad dude. He reigned in the 60s A.D. He didn't build the Colosseum. That was built about 30 years after he died by Octavius Flavius, but he did build Circus Maximus, which has a capacity of about 100,000 people. And one of the things that he did is that he would take the bodies of Christians and he would tie them to a stake, put the stake, the big pole, in a hole, then throw oil on them and light them on fire. And that would be your entrance into Circus Maximus. That's not even before the good stuff starts. That's just how you get started. So let me say that I'm so sorry for our sister who's 64 years old. I would hope that somebody would help her to find a congregation that's close by and could help her, because one of the things that we are not necessarily known for is benevolence. I believe this church is different. A lot of our congregations are not known for benevolence. Usually the benevolent fund is about 2% of our total expenditures in a lot of congregations. So we're not known for benevolence, so she needs some help. And maybe this church is just the people that can give her some resources.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Another question we were asked, and we'll give you time to answer this one final question. This question was asked: how can I help my daughter who was rejected by fellow family members?
Well, have you heard the TMI before? That's too much information. Well, this is TLI, too little information. I don't know enough about that to understand if there's something about her lifestyle that's involved in why they rejected her. Did they reject her because of illness? Did they reject her because of perpetual bad decisions? First of all, I'd like to think that, and even when we asked our daughter to leave our house, we were not rejecting her. There's a principle in Alcoholics Anonymous called let go and let God. So we were not turning our back on her because we had spent thousands and thousands of dollars on various rehab programs and all of that. So what we were doing was trying to say, I don't know what else to do, and so God, will you please let go and let God? Will you help us out here? So we were not rejecting her. We were hoping that she would come back. Sure. And after some jail time, she did. But it was not out of a sense of rejecting her. So if they're saying that this girl is rejected, I'd want to know the rest of the story. Is it really rejection, or is it an application of tough love? And what are the circumstances that led to this? But do remember, if we are, people are going to look at the way we treat our own families. And if we don't treat our own families well, then it's going to be difficult for other people to respect our profession of Christianity. So that's all I guess I can say without more information.
Thank you very much.
Do you have any other idea about her other than that?
No, that was basically the question.
I'm sorry, I don't know more about that.
That's all right. Thank you very much.
Yeah.
Thanks very much for answering, again, some challenging questions. As we try and answer some of these questions over this last session and the session prior about how do we deal with evil and suffering. Well, on behalf of the Linder Road Church of Christ and 1Question.net, we want to thank you very much, you all here in the audience this evening, and you all who are watching online. We thank you so much for taking the time to be with us this evening. We're going to take about a 30-minute break right now, and then we'll be back live streaming again as Dr. Gilmore will be back to answer some challenging questions about sexuality. And again, we just want to also remind you that this session, all these sessions over the last night and for the next 3 nights will be available on 1Question.net and on our 1Question YouTube channel for you to share, for you to make comments on, for you to continue to ask your questions if there are questions that continue to come up. We just want these to be available because we understand that there are many people in the world around us that have some challenging questions. And we want these videos to continue to be available for you and for your families and for you watching to continue to allow God's Word to answer your questions. So again, please be back with us in 30 minutes as we continue to answer your questions.